Okay, so now let's look at the sixth passage for the test of literature. The passage reads, the report of the Public Services Commission, though now too obviously obsolete to be discussed, caused both disappointment and resentment. For it showed, in the eyes of the majority of the commissioners, English domination in Indian administration was to be perpetual, and that 30 years hence she would only hold a pitiful 25% of the higher appointments in the ICS and police. So what does this mean? This means to say that this particular report of the Public Services Commission was not something that was of great joy to us. It disappointed us and caused resentment. Now, who is this us? This us is Indians in this context. Okay, I cannot, however, mention that the commission, even in passing, without voicing India's thanks to the Honorable Mr. Justice Rahim for his rare courage in writing a solitary minute of dissent in which he totally rejected the report and laid down the right principles which should govern the recruitment for Indian civil services. So basically, Honorable Mr. Justice Rahim has written 1 minute of dissent. Dissent is expressing his disappointment and his dissatisfaction, in which he rejected that particular report, the report of the Public Services Commission. Okay. Then next we see that India had got 3 representatives on the commission. G.K. Gokhale died here. It made its report. So what is this ERE? Year means before the time. Okay. His end quickened by his sufferings during its work. So by the humiliation of the way in which his countrymen were treated. So Mr. G.K. Gokhale died before this report could come, and his death was somehow maybe quickened, maybe it was, how do I say, instigated by the ways in which this particular report has humiliated the Indians of Mr. Abdul Rahim. So this person is a second person. I have already spoken. Who is this person? This person is not no one but the justice that we saw earlier, who has written that 1 minute of dissent. And the third person is the Honorable Mr. M.B. Chubal, who signed the report but dissented from some of its most important recommendations. So he also did not agree. He showed his disapproval of some of the most important recommendations. The whole report was written before the flood, and it's now merely an antiquarian curiosity. That means this all happened before some big event, a flood for that matter as it's termed. And all this, the curiosity that we have is a events that have already happened before. So these are rare and events that have happened in a older time. Okay, so India was forced to see before her a future of perpetual subordination. The Britons rule in Great Britain, the Frenchman in France, the American in America. Each dominion has its own area, but India was to rule nowhere. Alone among the peoples of the world, he was not to feel his own country as his own. So what do we understand from here? We understand that there are other people who belong to other countries who have been ruling in their own country. But as far Indians are concerned, we cannot rule anywhere. Britain for British was right and natural. India for the Indians was wrong, even seditious. What is seditious in this context? Seditious in this context is where Indians were rejecting the authority of the British people. It must be India for the empire. And again, empire here refers to the British people, or not even for the empire, but for the rest of the empire, careless of herself. That means she in this case is India, and India should not care for herself. We are personifying the country in this case. British support for British trade was patriotic and even proper in Britain. Swadeshi goods for Indians showed a petty and an anti-imperial spirit in India. The Indian was to continue to live perpetually and even thankfully. As Gopal Krishna Gokhale said, he lived now in an atmosphere of inferiority and to be proud to be a citizen of the empire, while the other component nations were to be citizens in their own countries first and then the citizens of empire secondly. So what does this mean? This means to say that only Indians are not, going to think of themselves as nations of the India first with rights, but they are perpetually thankful. Perpetually is for eternity. They're just thankful that they are a part of the greater empire. Okay. So just as his trust in Great Britain was strained nearly to breaking point, that means it got so low that he was going to break his trust. He was going to lose his trust on Great Britain. The glad news of Mr. Montagu's appointment as Secretary of State for India, of the Viceroy's invitation to him, and of his coming to hear for himself what India wanted, was a ray of sunshine breaking through the gloom. Conference in Great Britain revived, and glad preparation was made to welcome the coming of a friend. So basically, now a new viceroy was appointed, and his name was Mr. Montagu. And when Montagu came to India, he wanted to hear for himself what India wanted. He didn't want to report on he doesn't want to base everything that he does on a report that was given long time ago. So what happened? Indians were naturally excited to welcome him, and it was a glad preparation. Okay, the attitude of India has changed to meet the changed attitude of the governments of India and Great Britain. But let none imagine that the consequential change of attitude connotes any change in her determination to win home rule. So although the attitude of India has changed to become friendly to the government of India, and the government of India at this point was British rule, basically. Okay, although they grew friendly towards that particular person, they still had a bigger goal of winning home rule or winning freedom. She is ready to consider terms of peace, but it must be peace with honor. And honor in this connection means freedom, as I just explained. If this is not to be granted, an even more vigorous agitation will begin. So initially they were agitating, but it was not that vigorous. It was not at that level. Vigorous agitation means they would begin protesting more vehemently. Okay, so I think this is how the passage been structured. We can see that there's an argument, and that argument is being brought forward by examples in the second and third paragraphs. And finally, in the fourth paragraph, they have talked about how the resolution is going to happen, that a more stronger agitation would begin had peace not been granted. Okay, so let's look at the question. The first question says, why did the report of Public Services Commission cause disappointment and resentment in India? Now, what can we see that this can be one of the specific detail type questions which we get an answer from the first paragraph. And in the first paragraph, very clearly he's mentioned that 30 years hence, she would only hold a pitiful 25%. So if we see this, yes, the B option sounds very lucrative, where he said 30 years after the report, British would only hold 25% of the higher appointments in ICS and the police. But is this going to be a partial scope choice? Yes, because although this line is what we are supposed to consider, we are supposed to consider this line in the scope of this entire paragraph, which is clearly reflected in option D. The British had no plans of handing over the reins of Indian government completely to India in the near future, which is why we can see that Honorable Mr. Justice Rahim also wrote a solitary minute of dissent, that he agreed to most of the report, he agreed to some of the report, but he summarily rejected most of it. Okay, so our answer should be D and not B. A and C can be directly eliminated because they are none of the A is a partial scope choice and D is an opposite answer, right? So your answer is going to be D.